Hi everyone, it's Morgan Mullen, Arts and Entertainment Editor here at The Coast, and I am really excited about who we are going to be doing a live with today. We're going to be chatting with Ursula Johnson. Ursula Johnson, I have this little write-up that I'm going to just kind of read first as a bit of an introduction into who she is because, well, she's a very important figure here in visual art and I'm excited about it. But it's perhaps too easy to start off by calling the multidisciplinary artist Ursula Johnson a star, but I really do think the term fits. Not only because she was the first ever Atlantic Canadian artist to win the Sobey Award, which is the biggest national prize that we have for visual arts, or the first to translate contemporary art discourse into Mi'kmaq, as she did for a booklet of her 2019 MSVU gallery show, but also because her works are a constellation of permutating ideas and big as the night sky themes. This has always been the case since she burst onto public consciousness in 2010 with a symbolic scalping that she performed at that year's Nocturne Festival, and has stayed the course with shows calling attention to themes of unseen labor of landmark maintenance, and preserving traditional Mi'kmaq methods of ash splint basket weaving. So, that luminescence still shines bright now with her latest show, ITHA, the Livingroom. Johnson's first solo exhibition in Nova Scotia since 2014, ITHA is being shown at the Blue Building, which is the new gallery located at 2482 Maynard Street. Here, we're going to chat with the artist from her home studio in Nova Scotia's South Shore about the show and how it came together and why it's exciting and why we all need to go look at it. So just a moment here while I bring her into the room. All right. So, for all the new people that are joining, my name is Morgan Mullen, Arts and Entertainment Editor here at the Coast. Hi, Ursula. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
How's it going today?
Pretty good.
Excellent. All right. So we're here talking about your new show that's on at the Blue Building right now. I realized as I was reading, and this is a little embarrassing, is it pronounced? It's like all capitals ITHA. So should I be saying ITHA or should I be saying ITHA? Because I kind of sounded it out.
Okay.
Pardon?
ITHA.
ITHA. Okay, well, my apologies about that. So ITHA, the living room. Um, yeah, let's get into it here. I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. So thanks for making the time. ITHA, which stands for Indian Truck House of High Art, has been a work you've evolved over time. From originally a makeshift vendor booth in an act of public intervention performance in 2011, where you sold tourist knickknacks while speaking mostly Mi'kmaq. The knickknacks were purchased replications of appropriated Indigenous cultural iconography. Like, I'm thinking maybe a good example of that would be like mass-produced dream catchers. And then in 2017, you created a series of video artworks called ITHA Home Shopping Network, bringing the study of purchased cultural appropriation to armchair shoppers. I want to know how the new show kind of builds on these old ideas.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's been interesting to watch, kind of the trajectory of this work. And I say watch it, I'm in it and I'm the one creating it. It's kind of become a creature all onto its own. So I
Right.
think things that just kind of evolve as time progresses. And it's really, so that first intervention performance where I created this character from the 1800s, that was, kind of the peddler that was there on the tracks. It was during Treaty Day, so it was actually like an intervention on kind of the relationship
Ah,
on the crown. And so this entire work is all about treaty relations between the and the crown, but also asking about, well, what are other treaty relations between the rest of the country or even other international countries within, those member states. And so as this project has evolved, it's kind of like, okay, so there's the booth, the vendor booth, and then I thought, well, if that's situated in the 1800s, what if we move like way beyond and then think about something where we also consume and go to a place? Because, the Halifax market in the 1800s was the place you went and you took all your things that you needed.
right. Yeah.
But then being a child of the 80s, I was like, well, we have to use the shopping network because
Yeah.
it's obvious. Shopping network was one of those things that became kind of like blown up in the 80s. And so that's kind of the trajectory of that. And then when we had an exhibition in Ottawa with Central Art Garage, the shopping was featured there, but then we made a fully immersive installation called the Retail Store.
Yeah.
And then on my way home from the retail store opening back to Nova Scotia, I was like, I wonder who would be shopping from the retail store or from the television network. And then
Yeah.
that's kind of what led into the living room project.
Yes. Okay. I love this living room project, and I love this idea of like, yeah, who's calling into this kind of high art imagining of the shopping channel. I think it's so great. So the thing is this work is like very immersive. For me personally, it's the most immersive art show that I've ever seen. When I went to see it, I was just like, whoa, you can do this in a gallery. It was really cool. And one thing that as a settler person that immediately struck me about the space was how it was curated to feel like really warm and inviting. I think I mentioned this to you when we were kind of talking before we set this up, but like some of the knickknacks in the space reminded me of like things that I remember seeing in like old people's houses when I was a little kid, you know, so it's like very, very like down to the finest details, so specific and perfect. And so I could have like just, you know, stayed and hung out there for hours, kind of riding off that vibe that like, you know, it was my great aunt's living room or whatever. But something that kind of set off light bulbs in my brain about it was how this space, which is, you know, again, really, really curated down to the finest detail, might not feel comfortable to someone of a different background because of all the appropriate items that are kind of sprinkled throughout, that every now and again my eye would catch and I'd be like, oh, how do you kind of hope or suspect different people might feel when interacting with this space?
Well, thank you for you know, those observations, and I think it's really different because, you know, thinking about the people. So all of us, especially as Maritimers, we walk into the space and we're like, wait a second, I know this living room. I've been in this living room. I've grown up in this living room.
Exactly.
And I really wanted to create that sense of coziness and comfort, but also, you know, thinking generationally is very different. Like people that are children of the 80s, that's the living room they grew up in. The children of the 90s, maybe it was like, you know, their grandpa's room, or the 2000s. And then we have like these young ones now where they're like, whoa, 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 this is wrong. You know, so it's a whole different circumstance, not just because of the environment that's created in, but the social circumstance and the access to information and media. So then people from the 80s will go in there in the 90s and feel totally comfortable and at home and just want to hang out and wait for, you know, wait for Judy and Al to return home so they can have a cup of tea. But then people who maybe did not grow up in that environment and weren't susceptible to, you know, the home shopping network, or even looking at the pan-Indism movement and all of these different things, and they come in and then right away it's like signal, 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 signal. So they're fired off. You know, anybody who's under the age of 25 will go in there and they'll be like, this is a very traumatizing space.
Yeah.
You know, because they just see the icons that they're studying in school of how all of this is not right, and how its culture's been appropriated, how treaty relations are not, you know, right in the place. And there's a very big sense of responsibility, not just for Indigenous, but non-Indigenous people when they walk into that space, especially that age demographic. But they also did not experience the same things that we did that are in our, you know, 40s and 50s and 60s, where we're like, oh yeah, well, that's nothing. You should have seen what it was like 50 years ago. You know, so it's kind of looking at that social circumstance. And there's a lot of, you know, I created that space so that Indigenous people do feel like home, and so that non-Indigenous people also come in and they're like, wow, this is super comfy. I feel like it's somebody's, like, my family's home.
Yes.
But then the time you spend in there and you kind of look around and then you start seeing like the key signifiers of different things in there, then it aids in that conversation. But it's definitely, you know, I would actually encourage your viewers to kind of like lead them to other places as well, that if they wanted to learn more about kind of the context of the show, on my Facebook page, there's a link from the artist talk we did a couple of weeks ago. And then on my bio, actually on Instagram, if you click on it, there's a PDF that has a bunch of links that will take you to information if you want to learn about the residential schools, Mi'kmaq treaty rights. You know, all of that information is available on that link in my bio, and then it'll take you right to, you know, finding more education about that space.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that little bit of information. I'm definitely going to go check that out after we're chatting.
I think it's really important also to find, you know, a place of comfort in this country. And that's something, you know, I've been really kind of looking at. It's like, make everybody feel very comfortable they're in it, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't know if I should be in it or if I should be thinking something. So I always, you know, hope that people question that intuition that comes to them where it's like, this doesn't kind of feel right.
Yeah. Okay. So I promise I'm not just saying this, but that is actually how it was for me when I was experiencing the show, because I came in and I was like almost ready to sit down in this big armchair. I didn't, because I was like, I probably shouldn't just like sit down in it. And I was kind of like looking at the shelves, and then I started to see like what we're talking about, some of this, iconography, and I was just like, oh, and so it was kind of like I don't know what the word for that is, but it was really interesting. So my next question. A lot of the works on ITHA Home Shopping Network, which is part of the current installation, are priced at numbers that are significant dates in history. So, one of the items I saw was selling for $17.52 because of the 1752 treaty, for example. How did you choose these dates, and how did they kind of relate to this casual appropriation of items like for sale, so to speak?
Yeah, all of the dates in the original performance in way the peddler booth were all treaty prices. So they're all treaty dates that were changed into prices. So the Mi'kmaq, a lot of people who aren't Mi'kmaq and may not be well aware of treaty relations, they often just hear 1752, 1752. But there's
Right.
so dating from like the 1720s into the 1790s. So all of those prices are treaty dates.
Interesting. That's so interesting. Yeah. And it's like kind of the flattening of history, right? Where like in school you learn that something happened on this day and this is what it was. And it's always so much more complex than that. Just since we've been chatting for a few minutes and I'm seeing some new people that are joining the broadcast, I'm just going to say my name is Morgan, arts and entertainment editor here at the Coast. I'm speaking with Ursula Johnson, a very significant visual artist who's talking about her new show that's on view now at the Blue Building called ITHA, The Living Room. So let's see. In a 2017 article with The Coast, when you were being interviewed for the big Sobey win, you said, I like to create situations that make people a little uncomfortable. My artistic practice is known for that. I'm not trying to make people feel uncomfortable because I want them to feel bad or to feel guilty. I just want them to feel like a bit of an emotional response where it's like, oh, this is intense. Well, why is this intense? And I feel like we've kind of come close to this question already, but I would like to know if that intent still holds true for your newest show and what you kind of hope in a, like, if we were to kind of imagine two friends going to this show together, what they would leave saying to each other or what they would leave kind of thinking and feeling.
Yeah, I think it definitely does hold true.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty well, kind of for everything. That's kind of one of my almost like a recipe, I guess, on how I design works. I'm like, okay, how do I, create this space where people are kind of pulled in, but then also in that process of being pulled in, they feel, that kind of spidey sense of like, oh, I don't know if this is what I should be doing, or, kind of start questioning what's happening in that space, because
Mm-hmm.
then I feel like it gives people the autonomy to start thinking about, their own values, their ethics, their relations. I don't want to design something where I'm putting my values, my ethics, and my
Yeah,
all my relationships in there. Of course, it's always going to be in there because it's my work that I'm designing.
of
But I
course.
make it so that it's open, so that people can enter into that space, and then they're like, oh, okay, this is what's going on here, but then this is what I'm feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
it's making me think of this. And I'm remembering when this happened. And then so it tried to almost like make it open for some type of relationality. So it's like, because especially in the performance works that I create, it's all about that space in between us. But then something like the ITHA living room, where my body is not physically in that space, although, I do make a little guest appearance. So my body is not physically in that space, but I try to encourage that type of relationality between the viewers that come in, their bodies, and in that space as well. So I'm happy to hear that you had some of those feelings, and we've had like so many people come through, which is amazing. And for anybody that hasn't seen it, I would hope that they would continue to keep going and checking it out as well.
Definitely.
There's a couple of different, I guess, methodologies that I use in designing my work. So one is looking at that relationality between those spaces, but then
Mm-hmm.
there's also this kind of concept that I created quite a few years ago, that I often refer to as the safe zone. And
Ooh.
so in those performances, and nobody knows that it's there. They don't know if there's a safe zone that's been implemented in those performances, or there's
Right.
but there's a place naturally that I kind of map out in designing the work. And then I know, okay, that's the place that if people are not in that place, then they're going to be implicated in some way, shape, or form. But then if they find the safe zone, then they can just hang out there, and then I won't try to draw them in either by like looking straight at them or pulling them in or having some interactivity. Then it's like, okay, I need a break. And it's interesting because there's some performances where everybody's piled in the safe zone because they've all found it, and then they're all just huddled together in this performance space, and they're like, I don't know why, like, but I feel like we should all be standing here because she's not trying to get us involved. And so, and then that makes a whole different, experience where those people are crammed in this space, but they're all having a similar experience. So then they start kind of talking amongst themselves in that space. And so the ITHA retail store that we had at the Central Art Garage, that was the first time where I designed an installation space without any safe zone. Like there was none whatsoever. Okay. So you drive to the garage, and there's like 3 garage door windows, and one has a blinking like open neon sign. The other 2 windows, you can see kind of the perspective of it was that you could see the 2 videos that were happening from the shopping network and the testimonial video. And then there's the door. And when you open the door, it goes ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, like the shop chime. And as soon as you open the door, you've been like pulled into this space where there's no escape. So then there's flute music and drum music playing overhead, just like in a kitschy tourism store on Bank Street or Spark Street. And then the shopkeeper, who is actually the proprietor of the gallery, comes out from behind, stands behind the glass counters, and it's like, welcome to the ITHA. And then they're like, what is happening here? And then it's just floor to ceiling. All of these, these knickknacks, these power animal shirts, all these different things are there. And so in creating that space, I was like, oh, this is what happens when you don't create a safe zone. So it kind of made it a little bit fun. So with the current project at the Blue Building right now, the ITHA Livingroom, I was like, okay, what's the safe zone? How am I going to create a safe zone in that space? And so it's kind of, I'm not going to tell you where it is, but if you find it, then you're kind of, that's your spot. And people naturally just kind of flock to it and hang out there anyways. But also one thing that I would really like to mention, that the ITHA Livingroom is the first time that I've created a structure that's like fully accessible. So it was really important to have, the wide corridors, to have the ramps coming in and out. And I've been looking at physical accessibility for a while within different works that I create. And it started with the Megodedman show that I did at St. Mary's University years ago, where I imagined, wheeling my great-grandmother through that space so that she could take in the show. Right. From that point on, I was like, okay, we need to think about like the space and how it's moving, how people move through there. But then also, this past year being home and we're all kind of, cooped up in these little rectangles here, staring at talking. I was like, what about accessibility for people with neurodiversity, like to be on screen all the time, or accessibility for people who are, have hearing impaired or visual impaired? Mm-hmm. So kind of, as I'm learning more about accessibility practices within art production, it's something that I've been very excited about, and I feel like it's something that we should all be doing, as makers and cultural practitioners, to make sure that it becomes more inclusive for everybody. And it was really great to work with my dream team that I was working with. And if you follow me on Instagram, you can see some posts there and some videos that we did. We had such a great time. So we had Louisa Adamson, David Doms, and Michelle Gallant. And the 3 of those were amazing. And when we were talking about accessibility, it was like no questions asked. We were like, yes, of course, absolutely. And then we just like flew into like problem solving mode on what we needed to do to create that space.
I love that. And thank you for bringing that up. I would love to hear like an example of something you learned or something that was, kind of something that recently was a bit of a light bulb moment for you, maybe with making art spaces and art installations more accessible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I feel like it's kind of like an easy practice that I've been trying to do, and I forget, and I'm totally guilty for this, and I accept responsibility. But I try to do even just like image descriptions, when you're posting things on Instagram, just that small act of taking those few extra minutes to plop in an image description so that people that have readers, they can read and see what the image is all about. That's that is really it's an easy practice, and I know that I forget to do it sometimes, and then I'll be like, oh my goodness, I made a post, and then I'll like go back and just edit it because it's such an easy thing to do, or something like allowing captions when you're doing live streams or you're making a video and putting in captions. There's all kinds of auto-generated captions that are available there if you don't have the know-how or the resources to be able to hire somebody to like translate a transcript or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's the sort of stuff too that like is applicable in the art world, but that's also something that very easily should be happening across the board with fairly little effort. So yeah, that's a good reminder to me too to start doing image descriptions more, because I'm the same as you. I always have the best of intent, but then I don't always do it. So yeah. Also, I just wanted to give a little shout out to the top that you're wearing, because it looks like one of the shirts from one of the ITHA videos that plays at the current installation. Yeah. I like that you have arrived in costume. I think that's great. So definitely. All right. So one more question for you. We'll let you model for a second. We're really getting half the visual.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Should we, is it a spoiler if we let you explain a little bit more about like what that's about and how that ties into the show?
My shirt?
Yeah.
Sure. It's not a spoiler. I don't think.
I don't think so either. So I just wanted to check. But yeah, let's give it.
But also the ITHA video was shown in the retail store in Ottawa, but also it was in the McCain Biennial that happened at the Beaverbank Gallery. So maybe people saw the video there. There was no like installation or project or anything. It was just a video on a monitor. So the ITHA Home Shopping Network video is just about 9 minutes. So it is a comfy space where you can go in and take the video in. And one of the items that is featured on the ITHA Shopping Network is the Power Animal shirts, and big collection of them. Every time I find them, I'm like, oh my god, I don't have a Power Animal shirt that has an eagle. I need that eagle.
That's great. I just think that's like a really fun way of playing with a lot of the themes of the show. All right, so we just got an audience question, and basically this person's saying, for those of us who have not yet been to your show, do you think it makes a difference for people to hear you speak about your inspiration, or to kind of go in kind of blind on what's happening there?
That's a really good question.
I paraphrased them a little bit. I hope they don't mind.
I think it really depends on what people like art experiences normally are. Like if they'd like to research some information before going to see exhibitions, by all means, find as you want. If you want to just go in there like, kind of totally without any information, then just go in there, have your own experience, which is what I would actually probably say, is to go in, have your own experience, leave, follow the links, find all of the other informations, the talks. I also did, I was part of the Decolonizing Narratives lecture series with the Banff Center for the Arts. That's going to be available on YouTube. And I do talk a little bit about this project, so you can go on there. You can look at my bio, find that information, and then go back in. And then it'd be like, how did my perspective change now that I have all this information? So the first time, you just have your own experience, do your research, read up, find different things, and then go in again and see if there's a change.
Definitely. And it's like kind of also, I think, worth mentioning, and I'm not saying that this person was implying this, but just like there's no like wrong way to interact with art, just go look at it, see what you get from it, that sort of thing. And if anyone who is tuning in now who is kind of wondering what we're talking about, I'm Morgan, arts editor at The Coast, and I'm here chatting with visual artist Ursula Johnson about her new show that's on view at the Blue Building Gallery. And it is an immersive show that's kind of set up like, what was the great phrase you used a little while ago? Like a living room in someone's house. And I think you said it's almost the feeling of waiting for this elderly couple to come back to the living room with like, a little tea set or something. So, yeah.
And of course, I guess like the scene setter is that you're walking in essentially in the middle of the night in these people's homes, where the TV is left on and somebody stumbled to bed, right? So that's kind of the space that you're walking into. So for people that may have, a bit of difficulty with seeing in the dark, it is quite dark when you enter in there, but the longer you stay in, your eyes actually acclimatize, and then your vision just kind of kicks in, and then you can see everything after a couple of minutes. So don't panic when you walk in there and you're like, oh my God, it's so dark. But you're basically in these people's homes, and it looks as if, you're waiting for them to come in. And if you go to my Facebook page and look at the artist talk from last week, there's quite a big description about who it is that lives in the living room.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and it's nice too, because while you're waiting for your eyes to adjust, this is the sort of place where, like, the longer you stay, the more you see, the more you get out of it. So it's definitely, worth just kind of taking your time with it. But yeah. All right. So text greeting visitors at the Blue Building explains the show in its context, ending by saying, and I quote, Johnson invites viewers to reflect on notions of home, conversations we have, and the gifts we exchange. We might have kind of covered this one a little bit, but I would love to hear a little bit more about why those themes are significant to you.
Yeah. I could say one sentence just to kind of explain it all, but we got a few. I'll just keep chatting. One sentence, if I was to just use the one sentence, would be that because we are all treaty people.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So kind of like, especially here in Mi'kmaq, where that sentence, was coined, and looking at the treaty relations, it's often people think, treaty relations has to do with the Indigenous people and the government, but that's not what treaty relations is. Treaty relations are the people who arrived and the people who were here. And so that includes everybody. It wasn't just the government that arrived. And so those relationships between settler and Indigenous people is what treaty relations is. And so by people looking at, what is my responsibility as a treaty person, as a Mi'kmaq person, versus somebody like yourself who is a settler ancestry, then it's like, well, what are your responsibilities as a treaty person? Because we're all treaty people. So in looking at those responsibilities, one is learning our history. The history about the treaties, the history about Mi'kmaq culture is not just my history, it's your history as well. And so I think that's something that a lot of people forget, and a lot of people don't really understand, because then they're like, oh, well, that's not for me because I'm not Mi'kmaq. But to know that it's the relationship that is the history that has been underrepresented. It's not shown within our history books that we learn, in public schools and even in private schools, that you're not learning this information. And so it kind of, the onus is on us to go out there and to find that information, to share with our peers, to put within our own networks, and to put pressure onto things like government that are creating different curriculum, that are having policies, and all kinds of different things that are, kind of coming together. And so with looking at the idea of the responsibility within treaty relations, the living room is the prime place for people to come in and to situate themselves in these people's home, and to look around, to have that relationship of like, oh my God, this looks like my aunt's home or my grandmother's home, but then start to think, well, what are the conversations that you were having in your home? And, I've said it a bunch of times, but I'll say it one more time, that if you go to my Facebook page and you find the artist talk, I go into great detail about the conversations that did take place in the home that I grew up in my family's homes. We talked about fishing rights. We talked about hunting rights. We talked about land title. We talked about all of that stuff because that's our history. But I know from settler friends that we've had those conversations, they're like, I had no idea about this. We've never talked about it. So the living room encourages people, that you can see in that text, to think about what are the conversations we're having in our living rooms, and why are they not correlated exactly with those same conversations, and to have that same relationship of the conversations that are taking place in Indigenous community and family living rooms. Those same conversations need to take place in settler community and family living rooms. And then that is when we take our responsibility as all treaty people.
I love that description. Thank you so much. that's kind of the perfect note to end on, in my opinion. And I'm, I'm just going to check and see with you if there's anything else we should talk about, that I missed asking, or anything you wanted to expand on before we wrap.
I don't know. I guess, just one second. My producer's trying to show me a note here. Okay. Never mind. Well, I think one thing that I would like to kind of touch on is to kind of look at, it's really important to kind of think about, these spaces, because often when we think about the art galleries, we don't consider them to be extremely accessible spaces, and it's a very specific demographic that attends art galleries and museums and different things like that. And I think context is very important, and sort of looking at the context with which the living room is situated in, not just with regards to treaty relations, but also the space that it's created, where in this past year and a half, we've all been stuck in our living rooms. And then you're like, yay, we finally get to go to an art gallery. And then you come in and you're like, oh, I'm in a living room again. Totally. Like that push and pull. But it's also like what's happening right now in Halifax, for instance, with housing insecurity, and with all, these camps that are being dismantled, all of these different things, to think about, well, what is our relationship in those relations as well? That it may not directly be related to treaty relations, but it's a social responsibility that we have to have. And I think it's really important for us, not just as gallery goers, but as community members and citizens, to think about how do we come together to support people who are struggling with housing insecurity, and different things that we can do. And there's all kinds of places that people can contribute to, local shelters and different things like that. So I encourage you to, kind of do whatever it is that we can to create a responsible and just community.
Definitely. Find the thing you care about, try to help it out, for sure. Yeah. Well, Ursula, I want to say thank you so much for giving your time today and for coming on and chatting about this with us. So everybody go see the living room at the Blue Building Gallery. It's on until the end of the month. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe until September 4th. You can look on the gallery, follow the Blue Building Gallery on Instagram Live, or Instagram actually, and Facebook. And then they have all the information on there. And there's an announcement coming out soon that you're going to have to kind of follow to try to find. I'm not going to spill the, but please stay tuned.
We'll have to tune in. That sounds awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much again. It was lovely having you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.